me get off of this. I don't hear it recording. It's not recording yet. All right. So I'm not going to put this on the. I'm not going to put this on the. This is not going to be on the next quiz, but it is going to be on the exam, your last exam, exam 3. So here you are with the respiratory system. Today, I'm just going to kind of go over anatomy. So maybe just watch it just to watch it, but not. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to get to any test questions on this, but I'm going to do more anatomy than physiology. So I tend to ask more physiology questions in the lecture, right? So, here you go. Here's the respiratory system. The pharynx. The pharynx is that space in the back of your mouth, right? So we talk about it in the digestive system, and we talk about it again in respiratory system, nasal cavity, oral cavity. There's that dangly thing in the back of your throat called the uvula. This thing right here is gonna come up here and block, like when you swallow, it's gonna block this nasal cavity. But anyway, this whole area is your pharynx. So all the way down, if you feel your Adam's apple and just go like right above that with your finger and you feel it like to press down, that is like the beginning of your pharynx. And then the other side is your mouth. Right, and then underneath that is the larynx. Again, that's the Adam's apple, like this big part, this big piece of cartilage here is like your Adam's apple. And then you have your trachea. And then if you look, your trachea bifurcates, it like splits in two and goes to each lung. And look at your lungs, they're lobed. So it's not one lung here, one lung here. Your left side has 2 lobes, that little one down here, inferior and superior, and your right side has 3 lobes. So they're actually lobed. You could lose a lobe and still have the other 2. So it's not like the whole lung's going to deflate. Right, so this is trachea, and then like this thing's called a bronchi, a bronchus, and then they're going to split and become more and more and more. So that's essentially your and notice, see that notch right there? This is where your heart sits right here in the middle, and then the apex of your heart fits right into that notch there, which we call a cardiac notch. Whatever. I'm not going to go into the bones a lot. Your face got a lot of bones, but you probably did all that last semester. But there's some cartilage, there's some fat, there's some bone all in your nose. We call these nares, Nares, like nostrils. So your pharynx, I'm going to go back to that one. Your pharynx is divided into 3 regions, right? So this region right here that I'm kind of circling is your nasopharynx, and then this region right here is oro, O-R-O. It's color-coded right here, actually, and this is called the laryngopharynx. I'm not going to ask you that on the test, even though I wrote it out here. I'm just showing you that your pharynx is divided into 3 different regions. So your nasopharynx has the eustachian tubes. Eustachian tubes, they're also called auditory tubes. They're the tubes, they run from your nose to your ear. Right? So when you're a kid, it's like as adults, the tube from our nose to our ear is like diagonal. Like you have to go uphill for like the snot to reach your ear. Right? There is a connection between like the back of your nasal cavity and your ear. But as adults, it kind of slants up. But as little kids, it's more like horizontal. So it's easier for infection from like your nose to get to your ear. That's why kids have more ear infections than we do. But that's the opening right here of the eustachian tube. So that's going to go to the ear. So the oropharynx, I'll just leave it like this. These are called fosses. It's just the opening. So the opening, I don't know why I'm down here with the tongue, but the opening right here, they're called fosses. Um, actually, let me make this one. You have tonsils in your you have three sets of tonsils in your mouth. They contain lymphatic tissue. You've got one, the palatine tonsil. So in the back of your throat is the uvula, that dangly thing, and then on both, and I think that's what they've got right here. And then on both sides of it, bilateral to the uvula is the palatine tonsils, but you also have lingual tonsils at the um, back of your tongue, and then you have pharyngeal tonsils more like up here. I can't really point to them, but you got like 3 sets of tonsils. Again, I'm not gonna make you know that for the test, but just like trying to show you around a little bit. So you got different sets of tonsils, 3 different sets of tonsils. This is your thyroid. Again, here's your Adam's apple. If you look at the top of, let's say thyroid, here's your larynx. And the thyroid cartilage, that's what we call the Adam's apple. All right, so anyway, that's what I was. So at the top of your larynx, here's the epiglottis. Right, so you've got, you're eating food and you've got your esophagus here. Notice how it's like really small, right? Because your esophagus is kind of flat. It sits rather flat until food goes into it, right? And then your trachea is in front of it. So this epiglottis is going to close down and keep food from going down your trachea. So that is a part of your larynx. All right, so there's another picture of your larynx. Here's your thyroid gland. So when you look at this is the front anterior view of the larynx. So you have the thyroid cartilage, and you could feel that with your finger, and then you feel like a depression, and then you feel like another bump. So this is cricoid cartilage. This is thyroid cartilage. In fact, right in between, we can combine those words and call it cricothyroid ligament. So cricoid, thyroid, cricothyroid. If you had to do in like an emergency trach or something, you would stick it through here, right? In a hospital bed, if they put in a stoma, like a stoma is just like a hole, right? They'll put it down further in your trachea, right? But if they do it really quickly, like emergency, this one's a little bit bigger, so they'll look for that, and you just feel for the thyroid cartilage, and then just feel down for the first. Feel your Adam's apple, and then just go down until you get to the first depression, and then that's it. Your hyoid bone, which it's not articulate. It's the only bone they say that's not articulated with another bone, but it's an attachment point for lots of things in your mouth, like your tongue. Parts of your tongue are attached to it. So, and then when you look at the top here, here's the epiglottis, or here's a posterior view of it, and there's the epiglottis. You'll notice that here is the trachea. Notice that in the back of the trachea, it doesn't go all the way around, right? Because your esophagus is behind the trachea. So we want some room here for your esophagus to expand into your trachea. Your esophagus is sitting kind of flat behind the trachea. So when you swallow food, it needs a little space there, right? So these don't go all the way around. Your parathyroid glands. I don't know. Side view. This is looking down, right? So when you look down, the right side looks like it. When you look down down the larynx, you'll see 2 sets of folds. So they'll call them true folds or false, or true vocal cords and false vocal cords, or another word is vocal fold and ventricular fold. What the vocal ones do, obviously by the name, they are going to produce sound. So when you bring them closer together, the sound goes higher, and when you bring them further apart, the sound goes lower. And as you see on this left side, they're controlled by different two sets of muscles, primarily called cricoarytenoids. Um, and whether the posterior or the lateral muscles contract, that just makes it go closer together or further apart. The ventricular folds, what they do is if like you were to take a deep breath and then hold it in, like if someone's going to punch you in the stomach and you're like anticipating it, right? That's what you're doing with your vocal folds, or ventricular folds, I should say. I'm sorry. So your vocal folds are producing sound. Ventricular folds are like holding. It holds like air in you. But again, we're not doing a lot of this on the test. But this is just kind of showing you. And this is a slide, so you can see this kind of illustrates. This yellow area is is the cartilage, the hyaline cartilage. It doesn't go all the way around the back of it. The back of it is kind of open. That's because the esophagus, you see, is kind of sitting here flat. So this slide, what do you think? What do you think all this looks like? This red area. Probably, I see a little bit of it in here too. This red is probably like muscle, right? That's all muscle. This blue is probably, well, it's one of the, it's different. They're different kinds of fibers, right? So this is probably elastic fiber or a collagen fiber. And then you see that thin red line? That's your epithelial tissue. You can see a thin red line here too. We never got to look at these in lab, so. But the yellow here is that's bone, or I'm sorry, that's cartilage. Okay, the trachea. So move down to the trachea. It's it's got about 16 to 20 of those rings, and there's 4 different layers. So starting with the most inner layer, we call that mucosa, right? The inner layer of, I know I keep saying this, but the inner layer of stuff is called mucosa. Inner layer of your stomach is called the mucosa of your stomach. The inner layer of your esophagus, the mucosa. Right? When they take a sample from your nose, they're like rubbing they're getting mucus, but also the mucosa. That's the layer, or the inner layer of your nose. Right? So the mucosa has pseudostratified ciliated columnar cells. That's the only place where you find this type of epithelial tissue. And why I even bother to mention it here is because the main, I don't care about pseudostratified, it's ciliated. It has cilia. We just talked about cilia when we talked about bacteria, like the little hairs on the bacteria that help them move around. Here, cilia are little hairs that like they push up dust and different stuff like that far enough that you can cough it out. So if things get past the point where you can cough it out, the cilia will try to push it up. And it also pushes up mucus. So the mucosa, your trachea is lined with mucosa. It's epithelial cells, and then there's like some mucus that's being produced there, and it's moist, right? You can't have it dry. I just cleared my throat because of the cilia. You can't have it dry, right? You can't keep your lungs dry. You can't keep your throat dry. You can't keep any of it dry. It doesn't work if it's dry. But you can't have a bunch of fluid dropping down into your lungs either. That'll suck, right? So these cilia push up mucus as well so that you can clear your throat, get rid of it. People with COPD, like emphysema, one of the things that happens with emphysema is that the cilia don't work anymore, and then that mucus makes its way down into the lungs. So anyway, 4 layers. The most inner layer, the epithelial tissue, is mucosa. Right underneath that, you have some connective tissue. And in that connective tissue, you have mucus glands that are making the mucus. They get secreted. That's the mucus that's lining your trachea. Same thing with same thing with a lot of the pipes. A lot of the tubes in you. It's got this same type of layout. Right? You've got a layer of epithelial tissue, and then underneath that, you have a layer of connective tissue with mucus glands. And then underneath that, there's cartilage, hyaline cartilage. That was the yellow layer that we just saw here. That's the yellow layer. Right. And then adventitia, it depends. Sometimes we call this layer serosa, and sometimes we call it adventitia. It depends on if something else is connected to it. Right. So here, most of the trachea has the esophagus connected to it in the back. So we're going to call it adventitia. But other places in the body, like when you talk about the stomach, for example, we're just going to call it serosa. But anyway, in any event, it's just connective tissue. Right? That's a general thing we could say, connective tissue, when you don't want to talk about it that much. It's like here I put areolar connective tissue. And usually areolar means that it's attached to something else. Areolar connective tissue is attached to another type of tissue. But anyway, it's connective tissue, right? So mucosa, submucosa, hyaline cartilage, adventitia. Look how the air goes through, right? It's here on the upper, I'm pointing to it. So stupid. It's here on the upper right side of the screen. So the air goes down the trachea. Right at the bottom of the trachea, there's like a triangular piece of called the carina. It's a triangular cartilage here. Then it bifurcates into the left bronchi. I'm trying to think of how it goes. The left bronchi and the right bronchi. Remember, this thing's facing you, just like the heart was in lab. It's anatomical position. So this is the left side and this is the right side. Left bronchi, right bronchi, those are both primary bronchi. The primary bronchi go left and right. Then from there, so if we're on the right side here, primary, and then you see how it splits again. It's not showing you this, but it's actually splitting into 3. There's the secondary bronchi that go to each lobe. They're not showing it to you that well. It's kind of hard to do it with the way this looks, but the secondary bronchi go to each lobe. So the primary bronchi go left and right. The secondary bronchi are splitting into each lobe of the lungs. And then the tertiary bronchi, they split again. So these little ones out here are tertiary, maybe these little things here. And then these really tiny ones out here are bronchioles. So we go from trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, bronchioles. Then even there's different kinds of bronchioles, which are called there's respiratory bronchioles and terminal bronchioles. That'll come, we'll talk about that later, but it does end. So this thing, they should have finished it out. So tertiary bronchi, bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, and then right underneath that, the end of it, we would put alveolus. That's a picture of the alveolus. Like those grapes, like the bunches of grapes. That's an alveolar sac. Right, so these are, or alveoli for plural. Alveolus single, alveoli plural. Right, so this is the bronchiole, and then These are all the alveoli. That is where you have gas exchange. This is where oxygen goes into the blood and carbon dioxide moves from the blood into the lungs. It happens at the alveolus. Right? You see how it's all surrounded with blood vessels, right? So yeah, that's where we have gas exchange at the level of the alveolus. So we should continue that down after terminal bronchioles. We should put alveolus here. Notice the diaphragm underneath. It's relaxed right now. It's not contracted. So the diaphragm, when it's contracted, it lies flat. But it's concave or convex, whatever you call that. It's relaxed at this point. When it flattens down, the lungs are going to get larger. We can call this side of the lungs the costal side. Costal because of the ribs. We can call this side of the lungs the mediastinal side. My mom's got this this mass. It's not cancerous. It's a mass of like fungus or bacteria. They think it's bacteria, but they're describing where it is, and they said it's in the mediastinal hilar region, right? So when they said mediastinal, I'm thinking, well, mediastinum, the heart, right? And then they talked about this thing called the hilus or the hilum. That's right here. So we're looking at like the medial part of the lung. This is the part of the lung that's like facing the middle part, the heart, right? And so this is the hilum or the hilus. Both names, hilum, hilus. That is where the bronchi go in. That's where the blood vessels go in. It's like a kidney. If you've seen a kidney and how it's got that indention part, that's where, everything's going into the kidney. So they call that same thing on that. We call that a hilus or a hilum, right? So they're saying her mass is on the mediastinal side and it's in the hilar region. So it's like wherever it is, it's like close. It's actually down here on her. It's close to this. So that means something, right? If it's over here on the lateral side of the lungs, it's easier for them to go in and grab it and pull it out, right? Because it's here, it's going to be a little more difficult. So they're going to try to shrink it down and then go in there and get it. So that's the hilum. That's the mediastinal side. That would be the opposite side. So that's the costal side. Yeah, and these things are called fissures. Just in between, it's in between the lobes. That's it. And then the lobes are superior, inferior. So superior lobe, inferior lobe, superior, middle, inferior. That's it. So pretty easy with the names. Oh, this looks like the heart. Oh, it's labeled heart. So what is this thing? Look at those stringy things. Some kind of cords. What would those be called? What's those little stringy things called? What's that thing look like? I know I'm like asking you. Don't you hate when people do that? I know what it is. I want you to say what it is. What is this? What do you think this is? You can just say it to yourself. But obviously, this is the heart. So maybe we should orientate ourselves. This looks like muscle. That looks like a ventricle. This is the septum of the heart. So this is all myocardium, all of this. And see how it's thick on this side, but you can't see the other side. This side's a lot thicker. because it's so I know because this side's pretty thick. I know that's got to be um, well, it's got to be the side of the heart that's doing a lot more pumping. So the question is, what side of the heart pumps more? Like has a more of a job to do, the left side or the right side? And then you're gonna ask yourself, where's the right side of the heart going? It's going to the lungs. That's right next door. Left side of the heart goes everywhere else. So my guess is that this is the left side of the heart, which there is a that's a AV valve, and that is your other AV valve. So I'm guessing this is the tricuspid valve. Here's the chordae tendineae. But it looks all weird, huh? Like it's not up and down. This looks like it's slanted, like to the side, right? Because this cut of the lungs is a transverse cut. Yeah, right. Transverse section, right? So transverse meaning they came through like oh, look, like this picture right here, right? So it's a transverse plane. Right, and look, they're even showing you because it's so low. This is showing you it's the bottom of the heart, right? So they're slicing through. I get it now. They're slicing through the ventricles, and they got the top. You can see the valves here, the two AV valves. Um, anyway, I'm getting way off topic. Sorry. Um, the last thing I'm going to talk about. So the cells of the alveolus. Just like the other parts of the body, we have to keep the alveoli moist. But you're presenting a problem here because you're keeping them moist, but you have to get um, oxygen into the blood. Right, so the oxygen moves from. So this is like the sac, the alveolus, like the ball of grapes. This is like one grape right here, and you see it's surrounded with blood vessels. So here's like two blood vessels here. So here's a blood vessel surrounding it. Look, there's the two bloods. There's some blood cells in it, and so this the alveolus is lined with one layer of epithelial tissue. It's simple squamous, so it's one flat layer of cells. Like there's a cell, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. Right, so you can see the 5 different cells that they've showed you in this one at least, and they're all flat, and it's just a single layer. And so the oxygen has to squeeze through the cell to get into the blood. It's actually got to squeeze through the epithelial cell of the alveolus, and then it's got to squeeze through the epithelial cell of the blood vessel in order to get into the blood. And that's not like too difficult. But the problem is that you have water. This is liquid. There's a thin lining of water, and water has a high surface tension, meaning that it acts like a barrier, right? If you belly flop into a pool, right, it acts like a hard surface just briefly, right? So that's an example of surface tension. So we want to keep it moist, but we want the surface tension um, to be low, not like the rest of our body, right? So you have two types of cells. Sorry, I'll go back to that. Type 1 alveolar cell and type 2 septal cells like this. Like this blue one's a septal cell, and this thing's a type. So this is a type 1, this is a type 2. Right. So type 1 is just the squamous cells that line that's not a big deal. Type 2 is called a septal cell. They produce something called surfactant, and surfactant lowers the surface tension of the fluid in the alveoli. And I think I was telling you in a previous class, this is reason why premature children have to stay in the hospital. Often have to stay in the hospital. Well, why are they in the hospital? They say because their lungs aren't developed. What does that mean exactly? Does it mean they have little tiny lungs, like they didn't grow enough? No, they're big enough. They're not, the type 2 cells, the septal cells, are not producing surfactant yet. You got to wait. So those little infants are breathing in oxygen, but the oxygen can't move into the blood because the fluid in the alveolus, the surface tension is too high. The oxygen can't bust past that small layer of water, right? So their lungs, they need to get a little bit older. Their lungs are going to have to start producing surfactant, lower the surface tension, then they'll be okay. So, if they're born with all blued up and stuff, that's probably what's going on. So, okay, so, that's what it looks like. And that's the alveolus, and it's got to move across this thing we call the respiratory membrane. So it's got to move so oxygen's moving this way into the blood. Carbon dioxide is going that way. And they're just diffusing. Remember diffusion, higher concentration to lower concentration. That's how most things get around our body. They go from a higher density or concentration to a lower density or concentration. And in this case, that's what gases do. So there's more oxygen in this alveolus than there is in the blood. Therefore, oxygen is going to go into the blood. Carbon dioxide does the opposite. All right. That's just kind of a quick introduction into the respiratory system. We didn't discuss a lot of physiology. I'm going to save that for after the quiz. Stop.